Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in to what is going to be a three-part talk series for summer 2020. I know it's late in the summertime, but we'll get these videos out. There'll be three videos by the end of the summer. And what I chose to talk about is the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, which is a book written in the 40s. And it's been really helpful for me during the quarantine. I started reading it back in April when I started living at a parish in Bethesda, actually at the time. And it was really helpful for me with all the kind of the stress and anxiety and uncertainty of everything that was going on. The devil really wants to insert himself into the situation with each of us. So it's been really helpful to me. And it's been a great summer. I know I'm leaving in a few days, and I want to thank everybody for welcoming me. It's been really wonderful. So like I said, it'll be a three-part talk, about 15 or 20 minutes each. And today we'll just do an introduction to the Screwtape Letters and the general concepts of how the enemy, or how the devil thinks and the way he tempts us, and also the way that God thinks and the way that God inspires us to resist the temptation and to live out our Christianity well. So the first, like I said, the first video that we'll do today will be general concepts, and then the videos after that will be more specific ways that Lewis talks about in this book of how the devil tempts us and ways to different antidotes to those temptations. And I think we'll do a video on family life as Screwtape Letters informs on that, and that's relevant today. Everyone's spending time at home, and also I think in the political life, because that's also in the public sphere often these days, and Lewis does have things to say about the Christian's role in the political life. So Screwtape Letters, like I said, published in 1942. C.S. Lewis lived from 1898 to 1963, and he was a wildly influential writer and Christian writer in the 20th century. He taught at Oxford and Cambridge, and he's famous for other works like the Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote Mere Christianity. He wrote The Great Divorce. He has a space trilogy that's great, and different essays and things like that. He was an Anglican, and he never converted to Catholicism, despite his close friendship with great Catholics, like J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, was a great friend of C.S. Lewis, and to whom he actually dedicated the Screwtape Letters. He dedicated to Tolkien. But nevertheless, he remained very orthodox in his Christian faith, and he was just brilliant. And his writings really are a true gift to the church, to the Catholic Church. So Screwtape Letters, classic work on the temptation of a normal man, like we're all normal men and women. And the book comprises 31 letters from Uncle Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood. Screwtape is a senior demon who works in the lowerarchy, not the hierarchy, the lowerarchy of hell. And he's writing letters helping his nephew Wormwood, who was just assigned to be the tempter of this young man. And he writes letters on advice on how to tempt him. And the man is never named in the letters. He's only referred to as the patient. And the enemy, you'll see in the different quotes that I have in the slide, the enemy is always God that they talk about. They name God's name is the enemy. So for that reason, I won't usually in our language we'll say the enemy is the devil. But because of that, I'll refer to the devil as the devil, not the enemy, to avoid any confusion, because they call God the enemy. And Lewis wrote, you see right there, he wrote, though I have never written anything more easily, I never wrote with less enjoyment. It really it really caused a spiritual difficulty in him writing these letters of a demon to another demon on advice how to tempt a man. He had to get into the diabolical mindset, and he really didn't enjoy it. And numerous people asked him later if he could add to the Screwtape Letters, add more letters, because they're so fascinating, and they really strike a chord with people that read them. But he refused because he didn't want to go back to that mindset, that diabolical mindset. So let's get into the general concepts here for the next maybe 10 minutes or so. In the preface, C.S. Lewis writes, "Readers are advised to remember that the devil is a liar." And that is such an important concept in the overarching way the devil works, and particularly in the Screwtape Letters, that the devil operates in non-reality. The devil has a great motivation to separate God from reality and separate us from those things as well. And the way he does this, and sins and temptations, a lot of them kind of center around this main concept that the devil wants us to be separated from God and separated from reality. And because we're beings that exist in the spiritual world and the material world, Aristotle had that really right when with his hylomorphism, that man exists as both body and soul. So we exist in the material world and the spiritual world. And the devil wants to separate those two things. So one way he does this is in kind of a hyper-spiritualism, that God is the only thing that's real, and what I have in front of me, my relationships, the things that I like to do, my work, the things, my play, all of that has nothing to do with God, and God is the only thing. And this can lead to a couple things. It could lead to a Puritanism, where I see the world as evil and pleasures as evil, because God is the only reality, and therefore the reality that's in front of me, my daily living, the daily objects and people around me and activities, are therefore lower somehow, are therefore in no relation to God, and therefore I need to pay no attention to them. And the more that I bring myself out of the world, the closer I get to God. And that's a fallacy. That's what the devil wants to tempt us towards. And another way he does this is in kind of a hedonism and an immorality, where and we see this in some of the kind of Protestant sects, where my relationship with God exists in the spiritual world, and that's great, but that doesn't inform on the way that I live in the world. So the way that I live, my relationships and my work and things like that, I could do whatever I want. I could seek as many pleasures as I want. I could indulge myself. I could do whatever, because my relationship with God only exists in the spiritual world and does not exist. The Christianity does not inform on the way that I live my daily life. And that's another fallacy that the devil wants to tempt us with. And the second big way that he cleaves God from reality is with a materialism, where what I see in front of me, my daily living, my daily reality, is the only thing that's real, with a total rejection of the spiritual world. And this is the more prevalent fallacy that we see today in modernism and postmodernism, a total rejection of anything spiritual. The only thing that exists are the atoms and the molecules that bounce around and cause everything to happen. Even like my own free will, the materialists would say, is caused by the atoms and molecules and the chemistries of my brain. And he uses this, and that's of course another fallacy of the devil. Now C.S. Lewis gives an example of a man who's an atheist who's reading about Christianity on the street, and as he begins to be convinced that Christianity might be true and that God might be real, what the devil does is he distracts him with lunch, and then as the man is going to get lunch, this isn't the patient, this is a different story that they talk about. As the man goes to get lunch, he sees the bus boy, or the paper boy, he sees the bus route, and all these things. And so Screwtape says a healthy dose of real life was enough to show him that all that sort of thing just couldn't be true. And the devil wants to convince us that what we see in front of us is the only thing that's real, with a total rejection of the spiritual life. So Lewis does give us a kind of a cosmology within the Screwtape Letters, which is really interesting, and informs on the way that that Wormwood and Screwtape will tempt this young man. It all goes back to the fall of Satan. Excuse me. So when God created man, in a literary form, it's interesting. Lewis poses it that God kind of proposes to the angels that he's going to create a creature known as man, and he freely admits to the angels that he knows that man is going to fall, and he knows that there's going to be a cross, that he's going to have to die for these people that he created, that went against him, and sinned against him. Excuse me. And Satan asked for an explanation. He said, "How can you do this? This is crazy." And God simply said, "It's because I love them." And here's a line from one of the letters. Our Father, that's their word for Satan, the high demon. Our Father's disgust at such a lack of confidence caused him to remove himself an infinite distance from the presence which has given rise to the ridiculous enemy story that he was forcibly thrown out of heaven. So here's interesting. Theologically, there's a lot to say that I have no idea about how Satan actually fell. Did he choose to leave? Was he kicked out? And St. Michael's involved in there and kicking Satan out of heaven. But this is a helpful illustration of the fact that sin is us withdrawing from God. And hell itself is us withdrawing from God. It's not a punishment kind of necessarily from God. And when Satan refused to understand how God could love these men, these flesh and bones people, he couldn't stand it and removed himself from that presence. And that's where we are. That's where we're left with. And that's it's interesting because he does not want us to be happy. That's really a big thing, and we'll keep going. So, what is the present reality of that cosmology with the fall of Satan? How does that affect the way that we're tempted by the devil and the devil's interest in us, and in the fight for the souls that's happening today? And like I said, the devil does not understand God's love for us. And importantly, he does not want us to be happy. I think often we can think that God wants to take away our happiness. You know, we have a sin that we particularly like that we think makes us happy. Or God is asking us to do something that we don't think could possibly make us happy, in terms of vocation or whatever it may be. And this is one of the tricks of the enemy. The devil does not want us to be happy. In fact, in one of his letters, Screwtape regrets the fact that pleasure is involved in certain sins of the flesh, alcohol, whatever it is. He regrets the fact that sins are pleasurable. He said, if we could do without the pleasure, we would. We don't want the humans to be happy or have any pleasure at all. But they have to use pleasure as a way to distort, the objective reality that God has given us, and whatever it may be, alcohol. He wants to distort and make that pleasure out of balance with what God intended it to be. And they can't create any pleasure. The devil can't create any pleasures. Those were all created by God. And it's a funny story that it's Screwtape Letters. There's a lot of funny lines in there. And he said, we've tried, we have our best people on it to invent a pleasure, but we just can't seem to do it yet. But we know an answer is coming soon, which is, of course, ridiculous. And it's quite humorous. So, of course, Screwtape says, he must have some real motive for creating them and taking so much trouble about them. He cannot understand why God would create and care about these people. We know that he cannot really love. Nobody can. It doesn't make sense if we could only find out what he is really up to. So they think there's this grand scheme that God has in his creation and his supposed care of man, and they're trying to figure it out. Because they just cannot understand that love is that answer. Okay, so what God ultimately wants for us, and contrarily what the devil wants for us, I'll just read it. He really does want to fill the universe, this is God, with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose life, on its miniature scale, will be qualitatively like his own, not because he absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him but still distinct. And that gives a great dichotomy between the way that God relates to us in the daily life, and that he wants us to be totally free and united with us, out of many the one. And that's the way that God, he wants us to be ourselves. And to have us as ourselves united with him. And the devil wants to destroy our personality, destroy ourselves, and have us absorbed into the devil himself, destroying all of our individuality. But God wants us to be individual while still being part of him. Here's something else interesting. So in C.S. Lewis's time, Of course, many children died in childbirth and in infancy and in youth. And the devil, it's funny, it's hard to kind of wrap our heads around, but even like through this tragedy of young people dying, which was prevalent then, the devil loses in a certain sense because the death of a young person, the devil hasn't had time to work on him and to secure that person's damnation. It's tragic, but when a young person dies, the devil before the age of reason and before the person can sin, the devil doesn't have time to work on him, and the soul is securely with God in heaven, and the devil hates that. But God does allow, and I'll just read, apparently he wants some, but only a very few of the human animals with which he has populated heaven to have had the experience of resisting us through an earthly life of 60 or 70 years. So for whatever reason, God allows a few of us, everybody that's alive right now, and anybody who's lived to adulthood, which is a few people in the grand scheme of the world, and most people died when they were young, thousands of years ago and even hundreds of years ago. So in the grand scheme of things, God somehow has a plan for those of us that live for 70 years and have to resist the temptation of the devil for 70 years, and also to accept his grace for that long. So he has something special planned for those of us that do live to adulthood in order to really go to battle with the devil. All right, so the real crux of temptation that we'll talk about in the next two in specific contexts. But right now, in general, the way that the devil likes to work is he wants to separate us from God. That's the only thing he wants to do. And he'll do that in the most sneakily and the most non-dramatic way as possible. St. Ignatius of Loyola gave us a spiritual exercise known as the discernment of spirits. And in this discernment of spirits, we learn that when a person is moving away from God, going from sin to sin, and has no desires for God, it's customary for the evil spirit to comfort and console and make complacent that person in order to keep them going down that path. Whereas when that person is moving away from God, it's God that gives that person discomfort, that pings the conscience. So what the devil wants to do is he would rather have the enemy, he would rather have us take the gradual slope. So I'll read that first quote. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one. The gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. He wants to give us temptations and make us sin or tempt us to sin in as non-dramatic a way as possible. And he doesn't want to shock us with a fantastic sin that makes us really reflect and change our ways and realize what have we become and turn back to God. He doesn't want a big dramatic event like that to happen. So he's comfortable with us going slowly downhill. In the book, the patient becomes friends with some kind of an elite intellectual group of people, and Screwtape is happy about this. He says that these people are great friends for this person because without any spectacular crimes, these people are progressing quickly and comfortably towards our Father's house, and that's a similar idea as that first quote. They're going quietly without any spectacular sins that would turn them back to God. And he, of course, like I said, he doesn't give us the dramatic sin. And this third quote is interesting. He says, "Murder is no better than cards if cards can do the trick." So in the most non-dramatic way as possible that will not ping the patient's conscience. That's where the enemy will go. He won't go for the big bang, but he'll go for the minimum amount that he needs to secure a person's damnation. Okay, so everything that happens to us is fertile ground for both God and the devil to work. And our job is to respond properly to everything that happens in our lives. Every good thing, every bad thing, great celebration, tragedy, whatever it is. And this doesn't mean that we need to take kind of a stoic approach to life where we're stone-faced no matter what happens to us, because it doesn't matter what happens to me. All that matters is my response to it. That's certainly not the case. The heart, in reality, the heart has a very important role in the spiritual life. Being moved and having joy over the good things in life are indispensable to the spiritual life. And having sorrow over the tragedy are also proper reactions. But what C.S. Lewis is saying here is that the circumstances in our life in themselves do not determine how they affect us spiritually, but rather our response to them. So when things are going really well, God, what would help us spiritually is a gratitude and a humility in front of the great things that are happening in our lives, with the promotion or the birth of a baby and all these things, with a gratitude and a praise of God and a humility in front of all of that. And when things are going poorly, when there's tragedy or we lose a job, we lose a loved one, then a trust and a confidence in those times that will keep us from succumbing to the lies of the enemy. Okay. So another really important point, I'll read. God wants men to be concerned with what they do. Our business is to keep them thinking about what will happen to them. Very important point here. This plays into what we call the sacrament of the present moment. That the faith is only lived in the present moment. The present and the eternal are the only things that are real in the words of Lewis. So the devil wants us concerned with the future, and we'll discuss that in those later videos in the specific ways he does that. Living in the future, worrying about the future, playing scenes in our head of what's going to happen to us, with the result of not us changing what we're doing now and planning for the future or taking the proper precautions, but rather with the result of us kind of living in this non-reality of playing scenes in our head of what could possibly happen without us actually taking any precautions if it's a real danger. A storm's coming and we batten down the hatches. That's the proper way to respond to a future event. Whereas if a storm's coming and we just sit in our chair and wonder, oh my gosh, what if this happens? What if this happens? Without actually affecting anything in our present, that's what the devil wants. He wants us living totally in the future while ignoring the present moment, the sacrament of the present moment. And again, he wants us concerned with our response to what happens, not the actual, the event itself does not secure our salvation or damnation, but our response to it. Do we let this or that event bring me away from God, or do I strive to grow closer to God through this event in a gratitude in good times and in a trust and confidence and kind of self-abandonment in the bad times? So that's it for this video in the general concepts of how Screwtape works. We'll have the next couple of videos out within the week, probably, about the family life and I think the political life as well. Thanks for listening.